Greetings, everyone. It's my honor and joy to be in conversation again with Melanie Reinhart, my colleague and friend. And Melanie, I just so respect your intellectual work in astrology, but also your depth of wisdom and the profound way that you integrate astrology, psychology, and spirituality. So, and for those who aren't familiar with Melanie's work, I will put her full bio below, but also check out her website, MelanieReinhart.com. And if you don't have her book, Chiron and the Healing Journey, you need to get it. It is truly one of the most profound books in astrology that I know. So thank you for being in this conversation today, Melanie.
Well, really, Heather, my thanks are due to you. And I can echo so many of the things that you've just said about me. I so respect how you draw together all of the different areas of expertise that you have. And I feel you really are a woman of soul. I really do.
Thank you. Well, let's talk about the energies of 2023 and some of what you are feeling and sensing in the upcoming energies that we're going to be experiencing.
Lovely. Lovely.
How about beginning with the T-square you were just mentioning to me before we got on?
I was just about to say the same thing. So just before we went live, we were still in mid-flow with a conversation as we had been for a little while. And I shared something I felt really excited to see, in that on January the 28th this year, 2023, coming right up, because today we're recording on the 20th. So just before a new moon in early Aquarius, but the Centaur, minor planet Centaur called Chariklo, who in mythology was the wife of Chiron, she's not moving that fast at the moment, and so still is herself in early Aquarius, and at the moment is squaring both ends of the nodal axis, which is currently in Taurus and Scorpio. Remember that the nodal axis moves backwards. We'll be having occasion to refer to that again in a major way.
Yes, we will.
In our talk. But I suddenly spotted this square, which is, it's at 8 degrees, 44 minutes. And the thing about, when something squares the nodes, in fact, when anything squares the nodes, I've found it's also quite interesting and revealing to look at what's effectively the empty point of what would otherwise be a complete square. So a T-square is like half a square, and there's almost a reflective energy that's thrown into the space where another planet would be if it was a full square, so to speak. And of course, in this case, Chariklo being at the point of this T-square, the empty point is in the sign of Leo. So the little flash that I had was, given the qualities of Chariklo, which is something about the capacity to bear with and abide with and bear witness to and be present to, sometimes very invisibly. It's a kind of invisible, subtle energy of accompaniment, let's say, which often does actually show us the way, the still small voice kind of thing. Those kind of qualities we can associate with Chariklo. And it also occurred to me that a couple of themes we'll be looking at in this conversation is planet Saturn is about to move into Pisces. So that's the 12th one of 12 of the signs of the zodiac, the last one. And Pluto is about to move into Aquarius, which is the second last one. So both those two signs at the end of the zodiac, they do refer to very collective kind of themes at one level. And certainly, I think we can see that all over at the moment out there in the world. And that both has its blessings, but also has its major challenges, in the sense of it's quite easy at the moment to get kind of swirled up in the collective, in the minefield of Aquarius, in a collective sense, the group mind, group
The
think.
shadow side, yes.
Exactly right. And then, of course, it's easy to kind of drown, get pulled down and drowned in the sign of Pisces in a kind of a shadow way. So for all the sterling qualities that these last two signs represent, they do also have significant hazards. And I interrupted you there. What were you about to say?
Well, I'd love to go back to Sheraklo and how she can help us in terms of navigating this time. And what's your sense of how she's being with us? And I love that way of understanding her energy, because from my background in psychology, to be with another, to bear witness to their pain or their suffering or their trauma, is profoundly healing in and of itself.
Absolutely. And it is that kind of a vibe that allows individual understanding, insight, and given the Aquarian position of Chariklo, these are the insights that bring a spaciousness within which energy can move on its own accord. A very powerful way of seeing that can arise within an individual, bringing the kind of sterling qualities of Aquarius, such as a certain spaciousness, a capacity for a very fruitful and positive kind of detachment, rather than getting all entangled in thoughts and feelings and all the rest of it. There's a kind of woof that can happen.
So with that South Node in Scorpio stirring up so much from our unconscious, or stirring so much up in the shadow in our collective consciousness, it seems like she can help us hold that capacity to be in the witness self, feel supported being in the witness self.
I think
and
so.
Then connect with the heart, Leo,
yes, exactly.
To not get pulled into, the intensity of the turmoil.
Yes, absolutely. And Leo being one of the first, the first group of zodiac signs, the first 4 or 5, actually, makes me think of things up close and personal. So our personal responses, personal thoughts, personal feelings, not what the internet has told us, or not what other people say necessarily. Oh, it could be the same, but it's been digested. That's what I think, digested.
Beautiful.
And kind of made part of one's own reality. And so being able to detect where something's coming from, almost like a radar for propaganda and all that. I think that's really important these days.
Beautiful.
Because we are being submitted to an incredible storm, whether you think of that as like a windstorm or a sea storm, that being Aquarius and Pisces. it's easy to get caught up in it. And so the soul work, as I would call it, of that T-square, thinking of it as a full square, full grand cross, in the fixed sign still. That's something about where and how we can stabilize in an inclusive way, not by trying to push things away from fear, but just by giving due honor to our own personal experience, and thus inviting a visitation, I'm going to say, of an Aquarian kind, which is about spaciousness and clarity, and, ultimately going beyond one's personal thoughts, but not by being blown away by the collective. Yeah. It's more like a vertical connection. And as you said, centered in the heart, which it's rather nice, the symbolism. That's the empty space in this Grand Cross, is the space of the heart. So that's the prelude which accompanies this new moon, and which in a way sets the stage rather nicely, I thought, for some of the unfolding energies that are ahead of us in 2023.
How beautiful that she's reminding us that we're being held and supported as we move into these accelerating energies, because I know we'll be talking more about some of these big shifts that are coming. But I love in that grand square that it also then, the North Node is in Taurus. It helps us stay centered. It helps us stay connected to the earth, helps us stay grounded in the midst of the storm. And it really feels like it's so also guiding us into a healing sense of what the Aquarian paradigm can be.
Yes.
Which, in my own expression of it, I love to think about some of the deeper meaning of the age of Aquarius being the sovereignty of the self in the sanctity of community.
Oh, I love that.
Unity with with cosmic consciousness, so that we can find that way. And it seems like she's guiding us in how we can heal and being in community, in connection with each other without the loss of the self.
Yes.
But holding each other in compassion and being able to collaboratively co-create new ways of being in community together.
Yes, I love what you just said. And it also makes me think, as a kind of a correlate, how important are our group associations at the moment. And so this is the kind of group association that arises around a common purpose or a common set of beliefs and ethics on various levels, and how being able to stay with one's own heart when in a group energy field and just check it out, what does this association with an individual or a group, how does this feel in my own heart center? And what's that like? So just embroidering really on what you just said.
No, that's a beautiful way to describe it. And it does, what you're saying also reminds me how many people that I do readings for say, I need to find my tribe. And I feel
absolutely.
Like we are really seeking that and needing that connection with others who we can feel that deep connection with, that heart connection with, to be supporting each other in this intense transition time where there is so much uncertainty and there is so much that's in chaos as we're shifting from one paradigm into another. And it feels like new ways of being in community are forming.
Yes.
At the local level, but also, I mean, one of the things I love about just this community with this YouTube channel is the way in which people are supporting each other from around the globe to be feeling seen and heard and understood in the midst of this incredible time of transformation that we're in.
Yes, I also see that. And sometimes I think, the whole notion of globalism as a political force, to me, seems a bit like the upside down and backwards version of what we're talking about now.
Exactly.
Is that there is community, and it is global, that is already there. And so things are rising organically out of those kind of contacts. I believe this is a really important phenomenon, because it is already happening.
At the grassroots level.
At the grassroots level.
The truly Aquarian model.
Yes, not something that's enforced.
Yes.
Or arranged for ulterior motives, let's say, motives of power or prestige or any of these other things that are so common in the world, but it's something that originates at a spiritual level, where there's a resonance of soul, and how extraordinary that can crop up across thousands of miles.
Yes.
Owing
exactly.
to this Aquarian miracle of the internet,
And how in the midst of this, I mean, I think it's so extraordinary that Chiron is in the sign of Aries from, May 2018 up through, it's going to be there till 2026. So it's holding that energy in the sign of Aries through this whole tumultuous time that we're in. And with your deep understanding of Chiron, what is your sense of how that's supporting us and bringing healing energy to us?
Yeah. Well, one thing is that around the halfway mark of Aries, which is where it is now, that's the so-called aphelion point, meaning that that's Chiron's furthest position away from the sun. So it's further out. And, we all know the vernacular phrase, far out. Well, it's as far out as it gets at the moment. And so the point of exact aphelion was in the middle of May 2021. And it's going pretty slowly at the moment. In fact, it's very close to the orbital path of Uranus. So, as you know, Heather, Chiron's orbit is very interesting because it actually cuts through the orbital path of Saturn.
Yes.
When it's closer to the sun, and then it goes way out and almost crosses the orbital path of Uranus, but doesn't quite. But it's within the so-called sphere of Uranus, that being the sort of band in the sky, which encompasses the nearest and the furthest movement of Uranus. So that's where it is at the moment. Hence, it's taken about the same amount of years to go round once as Uranus takes. So to me, the symbolism of this is just so rich, because we can think of the orbit of Saturn and in many ways its general meaning as referring to what has already been established, what's there, even what we take for granted. Saturn's energy is one of building and structuring and also defending. So in order to create something, choices have to be made, and things that are not intrinsic to or supportive of one's deeper intentions have to be discarded or filed away for later attention or something, but we have to clear the space. And the energy to do that is part of the disciplined quality of Saturn and its sense of substance, okay? So referring again to Saturn as a metaphor for our defenses, that can also be our psychological defenses, which can take the form of outmoded beliefs or emotional patterning that at worst can keep us stuck in a rut. And this isn't just the kind of rut where you suddenly feel, wow, I think I need to move house or get a new car because I've been doing the same thing for too long. It goes way into the depths of the soul, into defenses that we don't even consciously know are operating, that keep us imprisoned in the same habits, etc., etc. So along comes Chiron and goes right through that orbit.
That's
okay.
beautiful.
And, you know, goes right through the orbit in a fire sign, shedding sparks all the way and shedding light, therefore, on exactly the kind of restrictive patterns that we might be suffering from inside our own soul. So it's a liberating kind of an energy. And, you know, that might all sound good. That sounds good on paper, right? But, you know,
living it is another thing.
Exactly right. So it's Saturn's job to keep things in the structure that they're in so that they last and have duration and have a life in the world, so to speak. And the same is true with our psychological patterning. So to state the obvious, that means that it can be really quite painful to be in a situation of transition where one is being confronted with one's defenses, one is trying something new. And, you know, the inevitable backlash comes of fear or confusion or all of those things. Those are all part of the process, that they are not the ultimate truth, right? So we get to work with that along the whole orbit of Saturn. And then as we individuate, Saturn goes further and further out. I love the pun in the phrase far out, till it gets to its farthest out. And
Chiron,
if we look at that from a spiritual point of view, you know, it's so poignant because there we are. When I say we here, I mean Chiron, us and Chiron. There we are, the furthest out in the solar system that we ever get, almost at the doorway of Uranus. And so there can be a tremendous sense of isolation out there. Because if we think of the sun, which is associated with the heart, and then there's the inner planets, all those things which are up close and personal values, personal thoughts, etc., etc. And then there's the social planets, you know, Saturn and Jupiter. So Chiron comes right through those social planets, bridges the gap between those and the transpersonal planets. So by the time we're out there, hanging out there with Chiron, we've both become very much more individuated than we were, and at the same time, much more isolated. We read in many different kinds of journals, all the way through from scientific and medical publications to much more publicly accessible things, that there is a plague, and, you know, pun intended, a plague of loneliness going on.
Yes. Yes. And
Even
the literal isolation that people have
exactly
had
right.
to endure, as well as the psychological sense of aloneness.
Exactly. Both kinds. Thanks for that.
And, it's just incredible hearing you talk about how Chiron is that healing bridge. And I also wonder, because part of my sense of Saturn's movement into Pisces in March is going to be a huge shift for us. And one of the things that I think is important is how Chiron can support our healing some of, as you're saying, the ways that we can get caught in our defenses, or I also see Saturn as how we seek to adapt to the existing social structures for a sense of security.
Absolutely.
Whereas Uranus holds that energy of guiding us to be in our truth and to dare to individuate from the conventional norms. But I also feel, just listening to you, that Chiron, when it comes into Saturn's orbit, can also help us heal our relationship with Saturn, such that Saturn is no longer the one that constricts us or blocks us or keeps us stuck in old patterns, but can be free to be in its deeper, more conscious essence, which is the planet at the boundary between invisible and visible reality, that is the planet that's less dense than water, that can help us be in this realm, come into form, but hold it lightly.
Yeah, absolutely.
And then maybe Saturn, as it's moving into Pisces, can support us in holding the forms and structures around us and our own sense of self in a more fluid way, to hold the energy of the uncertainty and the profound transition that we're in this time, where we want form and structure and certainty, but it's not there for us.
Right.
And we have to find a different way to have a sense of security.
Absolutely. I love how you said that. Yeah.
But Chiron feels like it's the healing bridge.
Yes. Yes.
And I also, and you would know this far better than I do, but it feels to me like Chiron in Aries is also guiding us in how we heal our sense of self.
Yes.
Aries. And how we're using our energy and the actions that we're taking. Aries.
Yes.
But also, I feel like Chiron and Aries is supporting us in healing the shadow side of the age of Aries.
Yes.
Which is some of what's gotten us into the mess we're in right now.
Yes.
That's the shadow side of patriarchy and the violence, power over, dominance model that we've been in. And that Chiron is supporting us in healing that as we're in this transition time.
Absolutely. And I think maybe generating a whole other kind of heroism. Because the kind of distortion of the hero archetype has been very dominant in all sorts of ways for Lord knows how long, maybe since the age of Aries, who knows?
Yes, yes.
And what I think with that is there's something about the energy of Mars, which of course rules Aries, that it's my belief that working with variations on a theme of our Mars energy is one of the reasons that we incarnate here on Earth. Because, the four cardinal signs, so Aries, Cancer, Libra, and Capricorn, represent the full domicile of the planet Mars. This is looking at it with the traditional labels of domicile being indignity or detriment or exaltation or fall. So the four domiciles of Mars are all of the cardinal signs. with all of the implication. We talk about the 4 cardinal directions and so forth. And I've thought about this a lot, and it makes me think something along the lines of learning about our own Mars energy and how to live with that and work with it as wisely as possible is a really important key to what we're doing here somehow. So I think there's a transformation in our understanding of the hero archetype itself. The cliche of the hero is everywhere, in movies and television, and
That
people's addiction to that really distorted version of the hero.
Yes, because it is coming out of the age of Aries, that sense of the hero who individuates, sets out on his own journey to, and I think it's gotten out of balance because it's really increased then that sense that we define ourselves through separation and individuation, and through being able to conquer the enemy and seize the prize. And it's also forgotten from my perspective that Mars goes on this journey of exploration, but is at its brightest in its orbit when it's opposite the sun, remembers its relationship with the sun, the center of the source, and then comes back into relationship. But I think we've gotten caught in this image of the hero's journey as this linear path of continuing to move forward, conquering, exploiting, being the dominant one, rather than the one who explores and comes back into relationship and comes back into balance and comes back into community to be of service to the community.
Absolutely. And also the connection there with the heart being associated with the sun. So that's like the astrological shorthand for what you just described so beautifully there. So the notion of the Martian qualities, like bravery, like courage, like an aptitude for leadership, and so forth, those also have their spiritual counterparts. And so to be on a spiritual journey, as I believe we all are, on this planet and no doubt beyond, those qualities are sterling and we need them.
Yeah.
And there's a kind of invisible heroism, which, and I'm sure that you must have come across this countless times amongst the people who consult you for readings, the invisible heroism of ordinary life. Never ceases to move me so much.
Yes, exactly.
The bravery and the steadfastness that so-called ordinary people can bring, living their so-called ordinary lives, to me, it's just a miracle. Absolute miracle.
That's so beautifully said. And it's not a heroism that's coming from ego. It's a heroism that's coming from the heart, coming from the soul.
Yeah.
And with, this theme that you're talking about, I never thought of it quite that way before, but it's so profound to think about our reconfiguring that understanding of the hero and the hero's journey. And I mean, so much of this year, from April through the end of the year, Pluto will be squaring the lunar nodes.
Yes.
But particularly July through December, Pluto will be back in Capricorn, squaring the lunar nodes in Libra and Aries. And I wonder if that's continuing to support this transformation of our distorted or shadow side experience of Aries, to bring it back into balance with Libra. South node
very interesting. Yes.
North node in Aries. Can we, in the Aquarian age, rebalance the energies of the sacred feminine and the sacred masculine? Can we start with Libra being in balance, harmony, right relationship, and find our self-expression in connection with that instead of at odds with that?
Yeah. And while I think that, the focus on the redefinition of both masculine and feminine, and also all the nuances of gender definition. So while those are maybe part of it, they can so easily become like collective movements or imperatives, which at one level can support an individual in their journey, but can also be profoundly confusing, because the temptation to comply with what our particular tribal or clan group happens to think about these issues can mask the true individual arising of that transformation that you're referring to. So what I'm thinking is that when the nodes move into Libra and Aquarius, because Libra is the 7th sign of the zodiac, and it's the opposite one to Aries. Mm-hmm. So there's very much an I-thou axis. So it's not between me and the group, the mass. It's I-thou, which is a twosome. And there's something about that. But almost also alternating between,
Yeah. But you're really, I think, tapping into also that deep healing theme of how do we, in this incredible transition time, and the Aquarian age is about openness to diversity.
Yes.
Finding our own unique self-expression, whether it's around gender, sexuality, beliefs, religious expression, whatever it is, but to hold it in the context of relationship.
Yes.
And that to me, again, may be part of the healing Chiron is bringing. How do we find, and these lunar nodes, how do we find our way back into that right relationship with each other, where we are seeing each other, hearing each other, holding compassion for each other in our diversity, in our uniqueness, without getting caught in the polarization and the divisiveness that we are so steeped in the collective right now.
Yes, and that to me there's something about Libra and its awareness of relationship is that it's the sign when we become aware of difference. So it's not a sign of merging all together and sort of melting down together like two candles who are very close to each other. And the surprise of difference.
And the beauty of difference.
Exactly. So the things that can intrude on that are often of a collective variety because of what they say or what is the done thing. All of
the cultural expectations.
Exactly. Be they ancient and traditional or contemporary, they can still coagulate into a collection of shoulds and oughts that we find ourselves willy-nilly obeying, maybe
and
as
forfeiting ourselves.
Sorry?
And forfeiting our true selves.
Exactly. And sometimes to find that sense of true self means being willing to include one's own vulnerability you know, because to be in transition, as let's face it, we all are at the moment in one way or another, and the whole world is in a transition that can feel very groundless and very insecure. And so our own personal tolerance for those kind of feelings may be really important at times, because otherwise the knee-jerk reaction to feeling insecure and groundless is to find the nearest thing you can to grab onto for all your worth.
To fit in and to have some form and structure that, again, the shadow side of Saturn, that gives us that sense of security.
Exactly.
So again, it feels like with Chiron at that outer reach of its orbit is saying it's okay to be liminal. It's okay to be outside of any clear structure that would give you that illusion of security.
Yes.
Allow yourself to be on this journey of discovery and of being, far out, in order to find what is true to yourself, to be able to be in relationship from an authentic place.
Yes, that makes sense.
And for me, the deeper meaning of Libra is also about that archetypal understanding of Ma'at.
Yes.
That Egyptian principle of everything is meant to be in right relationship with everything else.
Mm-hmm.
So that we're finding, and to me then that polarity of Libra and Aries becomes, how do I find my authentic self and be my own unique creative expression of cosmic consciousness, but do it in right relationship with everyone and all of the life around me.
Yes. So when Chiron is at its closest point in its orbit, closest point to the sun, of course, that's in Libra. So
wow.
I know, isn't that wow? In terms of right relationship. And what comes to mind there is that I think part of our transition, and here I'm talking collectively as well as personally, is this is not only about relationships between two people. This is about relationship with other kingdoms, like the animal kingdom, the bird kingdom, the world of rocks and trees. Those are different kinds of relationships. And I've heard recently of a few examples where natural features like a river or a tree have been granted legal personhood. All the rights, that's quite Libra, about justice, the scales of justice, with all the rights and privileges and responsibilities that implies. Because, the lack of personhood in terms of the wider world than just human society is one of the things that has contributed to some of the extremes and destructive extremes that we've seen in terms of how nature has been treated.
Well, and what you're saying is so profound because, again, to me, it feels like that shadow side of the age of Aries that has led to our sense of separation from each other, but from the sacredness of the plants and animals and all of the life around us.
Yeah.
And that ancient archetypal understanding of Libra in the principle of Ma'at, some of her principles of how we are meant to act is to be in right relationship with the waters, in right relationship with the animals, in right relationship with everything around us. And I think for me, some of the crucial shift in consciousness as we move into the age of Aquarius is coming back into that awareness that everything is consciousness.
Mm-hmm.
Everything around us has consciousness, that we are not separate from nature. We are a part of nature, and we have to come back into right relationship.
Yes.
And I love Elizabeth Satoros's work, The Evolution Biologist,
Mm-hmm.
who talks about how every species, as it matures, goes from that sense of individuation, survival of the fittest mentality, to realizing, oh, the only way I can thrive is by honoring my interdependence and interconnectedness with all that is.
Yes.
And we're the species that needs to catch up with that.
Mm-hmm.
And step into maturity, which I think this Aquarian paradigm is calling us into.
Yes. Yes, exactly. There's also something about even just the image of Aquarius itself. So Aquarius is the water bearer. Now, in astrological terms, Aquarius is the final one in the sequence of the air signs. And this used to puzzle me a lot. And it's still something I love to contemplate, because one of the meanings that came to me when I was thinking about this theme, how come the water bearer is an air sign, right?
Yes. So many of my astrology students get so confused by that.
Yeah, I can relate to that confusion. So one of the thoughts that came to me about that was, maybe optimally Aquarius represents a level of understanding,
Yes.
air, which cannot but allow the waters of the heart to flow, the waters of empathy, sympathy, and so forth. So if you really do understand the oneness of the life which we inhabit, with the kind of understanding that isn't only at the intellectual level, it truly is through every cell in your body, then what possible response could one have except an open heart with the waters of feeling flowing? So that's what
Melanie, that's beautiful.
Oh,
That's beautiful and brilliant, because it also feels to me like, and I really believe that part of the shift into the Aquarian age is that we're needing to rebalance our left brain ways of being with our right brain ways of being.
yes.
And the left brain is about our separation, our capacity to analyze and, critique what's going on around us, self and object.
Mm-hmm.
But it's the right brain that guides us into relationship, empathic attunement, that realization of our interconnectedness and our capacity to tap into our intuition and sense of our oneness with all that is. So
Yes,
maybe that's
so
a part of how Aquarius is helping us bridge that. And then it's reintegrating the left brain, right brain ways of being with the heart.
Yes. Do you perhaps know that wonderful book called The Master and His Emissary? It's by Ian Gilchrist.
Yes.
Who truly is like a contemporary Renaissance man in terms of all of his areas of interest and studies and qualifications. I mean, breathtaking. It's an enormous fat book, and some of it's very scientific and very detailed. Not the kind of thing I can normally cope with reading whatsoever. But I was absolutely gripped every single page. You'll find some very good talks by him on YouTube as well. And he's written some other books since that was his kind of magnum opus. But he's written other books since then exactly about this theme of the left brain and the right brain. And together with the master and his emissary, a fantastic title, and basically telescoping everything way down. He's basically saying that it's the right brain, which is the master, and that the left brain can
is the servant.
be the emissary. But if it should take over, well, we then have the kind of world that we've got at the moment. It's kind of gotten out of control, you know?
Yes, exactly. Oh, beautifully said. And we were, prior to the age of Aries, we were right brain dominant. And
Yes.
as we shifted into the age of Aries, that we became increasingly left brain dominant. But that, and there are other writers and people talking about how we have to reintegrate these right brain ways of being if we're going to survive on the planet, let alone thrive.
Yes, it's become that critical.
And that in reconnecting with those right brain ways of being, it's about integrating science and spirituality. It's about changing our whole worldview to realize that we're not in a mechanistic universe. We're in a conscious universe. And everything is interconnected. And to me, part of that meaning of Aquarius and the zigzag lines is not only about the waters of the earth, but that everything is living energy.
Yes.
And we're just in the sea of consciousness.
Yes.
That we're just one expression of that and need to come back into that sense of oneness and that awareness of the sacredness and consciousness of everything around us.
Yeah, absolutely. I also think about at the level of personal experience, because of the kind of very divisive worldview that has been so dominant in the West for so many hundreds of years. There's a way in which our feelings and emotions and our sensations, so the body, have been somewhat demonized.
Yeah, we're devalued.
Demonized and devalued, and therefore sometimes overindulged and being at the mercy of, instead of being in relationship with. But at a very personal level, those dimensions of our own experience absolutely need to be valued and to be there as a part of the whole. And this I do see very much happening in all sorts of ways over the last few decades. Oh, it's so fun. It's so fun to be able to say over the last few decades where I was here. That's one of the great blessings of getting older.
But that's beautiful to see that arc of that perspective, and that it does feel to me like part of the energies of 2023 are that all of this process is accelerating, the process of healing, of awakening, of transformation for those of us that are working with these energies consciously.
Very much so. And, just to refer to Pluto and the nodes again, certainly any planet which is T-square the nodes, a big emphasis is thrown onto that planet anyway, additional to that empty space theme, which I mentioned when we were talking about Chariclo. So really much of the year is colored strongly by Pluto squaring the nodes.
First in Aquarius and then back in Capricorn.
Exactly. So between Capricorn and Aquarius, so almost between, the pure Saturnian element with all of its different levels and challenges. And then Aquarius, traditionally ruled by Saturn, now with the addition of Uranus. So you start to really see what's really going on out there or in here or both. But it's all in the process of a big transformation, which is Pluto. You know, it takes, I'm sure you already know this, it takes 2 years to fully make its transit into Aquarius.
Yeah, not till November 2024.
That's right. So we get 5 ingresses, they're called in astrology. I kind of like this old terminology. It's such fun. Ingress means when a planet is entering a sign. And that can include when it's doing it backwards, going retrograde and revisiting the one before. So we've really got 2 years with the possibility of revisiting things that have already been happening for us, probably in particular the last few years. Since the last conjunction of Saturn and Pluto, we could make that it's a major marker anyway. So doing quite a lot of revisiting, as well as seeing the way open into our own personal next steps, and no doubt some big collective steps as well. But always, you know, when a planet enters one sign and then pauses, goes back into the previous sign, to me, that's like a revisiting and a time to really learn the lessons, the teachings that we were given while it was going through that previous sign. So in the case of Pluto, that takes us back to 2008 when it went
right
Capricorn. So there's a slow moving but really deep to and fro going on with Pluto and the nodes. And you know, the nodes, they're so fascinating, especially in their connection as associations. So that can mean, you know, who one associates with. And it can also mean associations as in groups. And so there's likely to be some transformation in this area. So, you know, any of us could meet very significant people who are part of our own wave of transformation, part of our own soul group, if you like. Kind of unexpectedly.
Oh, beautiful.
You feel like you've already always known them. How come you've only just met, kind of thing? And if one thinks in terms of past lives, of course, that can be an element too. Me, I'm not so sure about that phrase, past lives, because I think that to put it again into linear time is somehow not quite right, because there's many different dimensions of time.
And
but that sort of thing.
Parallel lives, yes.
Yeah, exactly. And so it could be, you know, new meetings with people where there's a deep vibrational compatibility and indeed a shared journey at this time. Very precious connections, those. And it can also mean, you know, Pluto square nodes can mean the ending of certain associations which have lived through their time of relevance and will peel away naturally in some cases, or they will morph and change into a different kind of relationship. So the whole year really is very powerful for the whole theme of relationships.
So it's really also, you're really speaking to Pluto being that planet of alchemy, that it's burning away so much of what no longer serves us individually and collectively,
yes,
to be
absolutely.
in the true gold of who we are. With so many of the people that I do readings with, I can sense they're moving rapidly to shed old patterns, old ways they've identified themselves, to be more and more in alignment with their soul selves, to be more and more connected to that witness self that's guiding them back into being centered in their soul self. But it can be very disorienting. It can be very challenging to be feeling like your sense of yourself, your structures of your life are all in flux. So before we stop, how would you guide people to be moving through this accelerated time of transformation as so much is in flux and so much is uncertain?
Well, good old Saturn comes to mind, because on the 7th of March, coming right up, Saturn will move into the sign of Pisces. And so I often think of Saturn as where the work of the soul lies, how one could describe it. So when it's in Pisces, Saturn is still about structure and form, but as you were saying a bit earlier, there's so much unsureness and so much, breaking down of existing forms on a collective level too.
Yes.
Leaving us with less familiar stuff to rely on, or things that we were thinking we could rely upon turn out to be in a state of collapse already, collectively speaking. So I think we shouldn't underestimate the degree of unsureness that can generate. And so being aware of those feelings, while that can be extremely unpleasant, it can also be very gentling and steadying, because if what's true is that one is feeling a bit rocky, a bit all over the place, a bit groundless, and so forth, then having enough breadth of heart to allow that feeling, that experience, to allow that fully, and where appropriate, to share it with a trusted fellow traveler, that can bring more of a sense of flexibility. Because, for any of us, when our survival buttons are pushed, we tend to freeze and become rigid, and then sometimes feel like, well, if I'm going to get through this, I have to be strong, and that becomes very rigid.
Fight or flight, yes. Fight or flight or freeze.
Exactly. And then if we go into fight mode with that, we will create enemies.
Yeah.
We will even see our best friend as the enemy, because we're in that mode. There has to be something that against which I have to fight and win. So this is all very kind of reflex kind of action. And if we can gently, there's the Pisces, we can gently restrain ourselves, there's the Saturn, then I think huge benefit can come from that, because there's a flexible kind of a strength, which is a quality of Saturn in Pisces. Also, thinking Saturn, there's a way in which working with our own boundaries and being able to regulate and co-regulate our own energies can be itself very strengthening. Very simply, to know when enough is enough. And to respect our limits in a way of feeling, well, no, I can't go out and have fun tomorrow because I don't feel like it. What I need is to curl up in bed. Or conversely, could be something entirely different, where you don't have to go along with the group and you don't have to be complying, and you don't have to make them wrong because of what they're thinking or doing. But if you can just gently respect your own boundaries. That makes sense.
Oh, that is so beautiful, Melanie, because you're really speaking to how I think the uncertainty and chaos of these times can be so traumatizing to us individually and collectively.
Yes.
And you're beautifully describing some of the ways that we then reflexively try to protect ourselves. And it is flight, fight, freeze, where we just go into paralysis, or fawning.
Yes, yes.
I'll just please accommodate, do what everyone's telling me to do, or the authorities are telling me to do, so I'll be safe.
Yeah.
So part of what you're saying that's so profound is, how do we step back from that, stay aligned to the witness self, hold with compassion all that we're feeling, all that we're experiencing, and find those connections with others that can hear us and support us and help hold us through the storm.
Where we can co-regulate.
Yes. And also I feel the plants are trying to heal us. The animals are trying to guide us. The planets are supporting us. So I think and the earth herself is in a process of change.
Yes.
So part of it, I think, too, is the more we can realize we are in this journey and held in connection with all of these other energies around us, then we're not alone in it. And we're all, as that Hopi story talks about, we're all in these currents of change, flowing in the river, letting go of clinging to the shore, seeing who else is in the river, not knowing where we're headed, but knowing that these currents are carrying us, the living waters of Aquarius.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, there's something about, with Saturn in Pisces and the theme of boundaries, it's also about regulating consciously, if possible, what we can include in our boundaries and what we simply can't. So the notion of being open, if it becomes an idea that we're then supposed to comply with because that's what everybody else is thinking, can also become a tyranny of considerable proportions, because that denies our need for personal boundaries. And so to be able to have those be flexible is such a profound teaching, because that means the potential that we, you, I, anybody, can be fully included in our own experience instead of having it denied by too much immersion in the collective and so forth. So it's very profound. Also structures and Saturn. So Piscean type of structures that we can honor with our Saturn, so to speak, could be things like creating a circumstance, a time, a place, etc., where one can fruitfully immerse oneself in the healing currents that Pisces allows to flow so well. So that could be any kind of creative activity.
Beautiful. Meditation.
Exactly, meditation, a spiritual practice that has an element of Saturn about it, a regularity, a discipline. So creating holding situations or containers.
Oh, beautiful.
For things that are Piscean. And
so we don't feel overwhelmed.
Exactly. So we don't feel overwhelmed, and we still are honoring the energy and paying our respects, let's say.
Beautiful. Well, we should stop, but this is just so profound to be in conversation with you, and so deep in terms of your insights about how we can work with these energies consciously, because I think you're really talking about how can we be in that witness self, to be aware of what we're feeling see the storminess around us, but not get either overwhelmed by it or controlled by it, but able to come back. I love that sense of the boundaries with Saturn coming back into our sense of our connection with ourself, and ultimately Saturn and Pisces with source, with cosmic consciousness. Thank you for modeling that. Thank you for speaking to that. And thank you for being in this conversation today.
Well, thank you, Heather. Really. Total pleasure to converse with you always.
And blessings to all of you listening. And may we continue to hear each other, see each other, support each other in this profound time of change, to be co-creating a new earth together.
And
Blessed
amen,
be.
amen to that, all of it.